Well, it is now my pleasure to introduce to you Pat Armstrong, the chair of the program committee, who is here to introduce our distinguished speaker.
Good morning. You are here as part of the Crawford series. Robert W. Crawford was a pioneer in public park policy. He was the Commissioner of Recreation in the city of Philadelphia, and he established a national model for local governments in creating recreational services for all seasons. When he started in Philadelphia, there were 42 parks, and when he ended, there were 847 parks. As a part of our privilege to honor him, his family has endowed this lecture series, and every year the chair of the program committee has the privilege of selecting a speaker for the Crawford series. And my selection, without a doubt, was Dr. John Crompton. Dr. Crompton, a professor at Texas A&M, has been a leader in our field for many years, and as a young professional from Cape Cod, sticking out in the ocean, I didn't have a whole lot of impact and exposure to some of these wonderful college professors and programs that were available. And when I heard Dr. Crompton speak back in 1986, he motivated me in my career, and I felt that he is really one of our leading professionals and leading educators and has done a lot to impact our profession, and I am honored that he accepted our invitation today, and I know that you will enjoy his presentation. We are live streaming on the web, and so this is video, so I've been asked to have you turn around and wave at the camera and say hello to all of your professional friends who couldn't make it here to Las Vegas but are watching us, and I am thrilled that they also will be able to hear the sage advice and information that will be shared this morning. So without any further ado, Dr. Crompton.
Well, thank you, Pat, for the honor of selecting me for the Bob Crawford Lecture. Mr. Crawford, I had an influence on me in my early years in the field. He and I interacted on several occasions, and he was generous in his advice and counsel to me. Bob Crawford, the son of Scottish immigrants in Iowa, he was headed for the coal mines where his father was. He got, because of his sporting progress, he got to go to Montclair University. He got himself through university by coaching because he was a competent football player. And then he got an offer to be a playground leader in Newark, and that was the start of his career. He went through the National Recreation School in the 1930s, which of course was the only educational opportunity available for people in recreation in that era. They graduated. It was a one-year program. That, and then he had one or two other jobs in New Jersey before he went to Oakland in California. And then after he had been in Oakland for a while, Philadelphia came calling. He had no intention of leaving Oakland, but he did. He went to California. He went to Philadelphia. And when he got to Philadelphia, he inherited a cruddy, awful system. It was pretty bad. And when he left it 30 years later, almost 30 years later, it was a model system for this country. There was an article in Sports Illustrated which sort of is indicative of his standing. This article appeared in the 1970s, and it was talking about Philadelphia. And in there, and I quote, it said, Mr. Crawford is the most admired and respected man in the country in the field of recreation. This was no ordinary individual. Very generous, a man of tremendous integrity, and since that time I've had the privilege of counting Bob Crawford Jr. as one of my friends. Bob Crawford Jr. went Wharton School of Business, started a business in Chicago, and now employs 800 people in various places. And Bob Jr. was coming here today to this lecture, but then his wife reminded him this was the week of their 50th wedding anniversary, and she wasn't going to spend it in Las Vegas, and so they've gone to Hawaii. So perhaps he's watching the thing on this whatever gizmo we've got here that gets it from A to B. I don't understand any of this technology. And so this is our 50th anniversary, and when you look at the requirements of the Crawford Endowment, it is to look at our heritage and say what impact it might have on our future. So I took as my theme that Parks and Recreation has evolved, in my experience, and I started in this field, my first job 45 years ago, it has evolved through 6 eras. Now, those eras occurred chronologically. And yet, when I walk around or wander around America today, and when cities invite me to do something or other in their city, I look at it and I find cities in every one of those eras. There are some still in era 1, and there are some who are all the way in era 6. And so, as we go through this, my pitch will be that our future as a field, and your future as a professional and your city, depends upon how far through those eras you are. So I want you to think about your own thinking and your own status, and I want you to think about your agency's thinking and where it is in its status. So without far more ado, let me start at the beginning. My background is in marketing. The field of marketing started in 1960, as far as I'm concerned. There was an article published in the Harvard Business Review in July-August 1960 by a gentleman called Theodore Levitt, and it was called Marketing Myopia. Ted Levitt went on to be the dean of the Harvard Business School, and he was he published 30-odd books and was a leading thinker in marketing. And for me, that article starts the field of marketing. Levitt said at that time that businesses suffered from marketing myopia, which was a terminal disease. Myopic is a vision thing. If you go to your eye doctor, myopic vision means it's narrow and you can't see very far. And he said that's the problem with businesses. They're all hung up on products, and what they don't realize is nobody wants products. They want what the products do for them. That was a remarkable insight in 1960. And so in that article he said, and you can substitute Parks and Recreation for goods producing in here, that an industry is a customer satisfying process, not a goods producing process. Is vital for all businessmen to understand. Given the customer's needs, the industry develops backward, creating the things by which customer satisfactions are achieved. And that might seem mundane and ordinary to you today. It was absolutely revolutionary in 1960. He asked a fundamental question, the question which all of us need to ask ourselves today in every organization: what business are we in? And he said businesses define that in terms of products, and as a result of that they suffer from marketing myopia and they die. And he used lots of illustrations, and in the interest of time I'll just pick up 1 or 2, but you still see this illustration in the marketing textbooks today. He said that in America back in the 1840s there were lots of horse and buggies. People got around with horse and buggies, and the horse and buggy companies thrived. And if you did the projections in those days, there'd be this many horse and buggies in 1840, in 1841, 1842, and 1843, and you go right through the roof. By 2015, you would have millions, hundreds of millions of horse and buggies, and they'd be, I mean, the only limiting factor we have, fast you get the dung off the street to get them through, and there aren't any. What happened? Well, what happened was, along came a thing called an automobile. And people didn't want horse and buggies. They wanted to get from A to B efficiently. And here was a better way of doing it. And they weren't in horse and buggies. They were in transportation is the point. That's the benefit that they wanted, but they were hung up on products. And so the horse and buggy companies died and a new company came in. The horse and buggy companies should have embraced the new technology. They knew a lot about logistics and about moving people, but they failed to define their business in terms of what benefits customer wanted. One other example from Levitt's pioneering seminal article was he got after the movie people. The movie people at that time were trying to get legislation passed in Congress to shut down television except for limited hours in the day. And they sure weren't going to allow the television to show their movies because they viewed the television as competition to the movies. And Levitt said, he used a bit different words, but basically he said, you're idiots. He said, you don't understand, you're not in the movie business, you're in the entertainment business. And you should be, say, embracing television and getting into it and say, here's a different way of entertaining people. And you look at our our companies today who run entertainment, you know, you take Disney. I mean, Disney doesn't do cartoons. I mean, they do, you know, cruise ships and theme parks and all kinds of movies and retail and anything that generates entertainment. Well, Levitt forecast all that way back when. And those businesses that didn't recognize the business they were in died. And so the first textbook in this field was issued by Philip Kotler at about that time. And he in that this 1960 period had an excellent definition of a business which has always resonated with me. He cited Charles Revson, who was the president of Revlon Cosmetics. He built Revlon Cosmetic Empire, and this was Revson's definition of his business. He said, in the factory, we make cosmetics. In the store, we sell hope. People don't buy cosmetics because they want to smear grease all over their face. They buy cosmetics because it does something for them. They don't care about the particular kind of grease. They care about what the impression the grease creates. It's the benefit that they're looking for. And so Crompton, when he did his MBA in England, was all steeped in this stuff and was ready to go. And with only the chutzpah and the ignorance that a 25-year-old could drum up, he started his own consulting business. Can you imagine that? 25 years old, I mean, it's absurd. But through serendipity and no skill whatsoever, it grew to be the largest consulting business in Northern Europe. We had 25 full-time and 10 part-time staff, and we were into all of this stuff. And then I come to America in 1974, and I'm loaded up with this stuff to find this field is nowhere. I mean, they are nowhere with this stuff. I might as well have come off the moon. This field is in the pre-marketing myopia, the pre-Ted Levitt area. It's got an activity custodial focus. All the emphasis is on producing programs or producing facilities. And that's what our job was. We are clean, safe, ready to go. Nobody was concerned about if anybody showed up or what they did or what the purpose of the vehicles was or whatever. It was all about the facility. We were part of civic infrastructure in those days. Cities gave you money and they said to you, produce the stuff, the playgrounds, the parks and so on. That's the way it operates. It was this early activity custodial era, the first era that I bumped into when I got here. And so that proceeded until June 1978, when the whole world changed. In June 1978, you will recall, Proposition 13 passed in California. It was the watershed, and politics and life as an elected official was changed forever. Before that time, we were part of the civic infrastructure. Proposition 13 was the apogee, the watershed of the tax revolt. And after that, from Proposition 13 onwards, we are politicians, and I have to interject here, some of us get dumber as we got older, and I got elected to city council a few years ago. I'm not on it now, but I've been in that role for 4 or 5 years, and I won 3 elections, but I'm not doing that now. But those elected officials got elected on cutting taxes, not giving goodies. And so what people said to us, those of us in Parks and Recreation, was, yes, of course we want the services, but don't expect money from government anymore because of the tax revolt. Around that time, I was on a panel with a gentleman from Boston. He had been the mayor of the city of Boston for 16 years. His name was Kevin White. And Mr. White said something to me that has always resonated. He said, I hate these constant crises, but without them, would we ever get anything done? And I was talking about this in class one day, and one of my Chinese students drew this for me. He said, Dr. Crompton, in China, we write the word crisis with 2 characters. The first one means danger, and the other means opportunity. Danger. We're threatened, and so we have to change the status quo, which is an opportunity. We have to do some things differently, because if we don't, we will die. And so Proposition 13 of the tax revolt hit, and we had to do something differently. And what we did differently was we had to sell our stuff. You know, this was a novel scenario. We had never had to do this before. And now they were into things like pricing and so on, all this sort of stuff, you know, which we had no training in at all. We were facility and program guys and gals. We didn't do selling. You know, but they say you have to generate revenue. So how does business do that? Well, they market. Of course, they thought marketing was selling. They sell. And so we became salesmen, and we had to try to sell. We didn't do it very well because we had no training in it, but we had moved from just producing facilities to having to sell the facilities. And so we started with the facility here, the program or the service. Oh, I'm pressing wrong buttons. The technology always sort of beats me at these things. I can't do any of this stuff, but there we go. I'm good again. So we go back to we start with the program or service. We engage in some promotional effort. Promo, Latin, communicate, just means communication. We communicate to client groups, and they don't buy it. Why? Because they didn't want it. It was your idea. It was your stuff you were selling. It wasn't their idea. Selling starts with the program or service developed by you. Promotional effort seeks to convince client groups to participate. Client groups fail to participate because it doesn't meet their wants. And of course, what we should be doing is this whole bit of user focus. The user focus starts with what clients want over here, and then if I press the right button over here, and then I can't even aim it right, starts with client group wants. You develop a program or service as a vehicle to deliver those benefits. You tell people about it, and of course they buy it because it was their idea in the first place. Different orientation. And so gradually there was a movement towards this user focus away from just selling. Sell Jack Jones buys, you got to see Jack Jones to Jack Jones's eyes, is sort of the mantra of this sort of whole idea. To sell Jack Jones, what Jack Jones buys, you have to see Jack Jones through Jack Jones's eyes. And so when I was doing my MBA program back in England, I will remember the professor coming in one day with a mousetrap. And he showed us an article where you know, you have your famous Mr. Emerson here, who says, what did he say up here? If a man can write a better book, preach a better sermon, or make a better mousetrap, then his neighbor, though he builds his house in the woods in the world, will make a beaten path to his door. Build a better mousetrap, the world will be the path to your door. And you all are familiar with that, although I've never found where Emerson actually said it, but he's alleged to have said it. So we have this mousetrap, and people have since been trying to build a better mousetrap. In fact, the last time I looked at the US Patent Office, there were 4,400 patents on mousetraps. We have been working at this for a while. And so the professor came in, and these guys have produced a super-duper mousetrap. It was a big wire cage, and it had a whirling mechanism in it, and it wafted scent all around the house. And you couldn't smell that scent, but the mice could. They came running into the mousetrap, and it chopped him up as they came on in. So the company went bankrupt. But Mr. Emerson had said, better mousetrap. It was much better mousetrap. Well, who set the mousetraps in those days? Well, in our house, we used to live on the sandhills just outside Liverpool. My mother set the mousetrap. Why did she set them? Why did she set? Well, the mice were in the pantry. That was her domain. The kitchen was her domain. She set the mousetraps. Now, when the mouse comes into the trap, eats the cheese, and it slams it and kills it off, what does me mother do? She takes the 10-cent trap and she chucks it in the garbage. Now she's got this $15 machine. What's she got to do? She got to pick out all the goo and the gore and the whatever. So he didn't do it. I mean, brilliant idea, didn't work. That's always stuck with me. We have brilliant ideas, but it's not about us. It's about whether the customer wants that idea, if it meets them. So when I go into when people invite me into their agencies, I always ask 3 questions which tell me how user-focused you are. People say, of course we're customer-oriented. I've got 3 questions that sort it out, for me anyway. Number 1, how much market research do we do? Now, I'm not talking about fancy studies and consultants and probability samples and all this stuff. You can do some of that, but most of us can't afford it. For the most part, I'm talking about if you've got a rec centre, do you buy some pizza in once a month and invite some of your folks to come in and share some pizza and talk about what you can do better? Do you do that in an ice rink? Do you walk about and ask people what they do? One of our students last year was hired by the Park Service in Yellowstone, and her job was to go to all the lay-bys and talk to people about their experience in Yellowstone and report each day back to the superintendent about any complaints or suggestions that people had. I mean, that's market research. That's what I'm talking about. I mean, so do you go to the neighbourhood meetings and ask them, if you haven't used a recreation facility, why not? What can we do better? What can we do to attract you? And that's the market research I'm talking about. Most of the time, when I ask how much market research do we do, the answer is not much. Number two, second question. Why do we do what we do today? Answer most of the time, because that's what I've been trained in. That's what our agency's always done. That's in my comfort zone. That's what I know, and the ping is this way all the way. It's not that way, because that's what they wanted. It's this way all the time. And that tells me right away we don't have a user orientation in the agency. Number three. What are we doing different from 5 years ago? And sometimes what I've done when I've gone into agencies is ask them, give me your recreation quarterly brochure, and print it out for me. I don't do gizmos. Give me your quarterly brochure and give me the current one 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and 20 years ago. And then I'll content analyze them and see if there's much difference. And most of the time there isn't. Now, I mean, the world has radically changed in the last 5 years, and I take my classes through in all the ways they've done it. If you're still doing much of the stuff you were doing 5 years ago, clearly you're not user-oriented. So those are my... you will notice I have not used the word marketing in this presentation. It is an awful word. It gets in the way. It's an absolutely terrible word. I never use it. I learned that from Bill Mott. Bill Mott, probably the most influential professional in the second half of the 20th century, William Penn Mott. After he'd done wonderful things in California, finally Ronald Reagan persuaded him to become head of the National Park Service. So Mr. Mott goes into being head of the Park Service, and he calls me one day. And he says, Crompton, he says, I'm going to have a convocation. And the Park Service, they have a convocation once every 10 years, and they bring all of their regional offices, every one of their superintendents from the 400 sites they've got, into one place. In this case, they're bringing them into the Tetons. So he said, Crompton, I've got 700 folks in Teton Lodge, and you get 1 hour, and you've got to get them excited about marketing, because the Park Service has got to get into marketing. He said, but here's the deal. You don't mention the word marketing once, because if you do, we're dead. I mean, marketing means, telemarketing and billboards and ads and hard sell, and we're tree huggers. We're spiritual beings. We don't do any of that. So we're not into marketing. So Crompton goes through his slides in those days, and he crosses out the words marketing, and he puts in facilitating user benefits. Oh, loved it. It was terrific. It was great. The word marketing much of the time gets in the way. Whenever somebody tells me they've hired a marketing person for their department, I go, oh, no. That means we've had somebody do some promotion or some social media or stuff, and it means immediately that person does marketing, and the rest of us are not user-oriented, right? I mean, it's nonsense. I cringe when I hear they've had marketing person. Ugh. What they mean is somebody do some brochures or something. So we move on. So we've talked about 3 eras. We've talked about the activity custodial focus. Clean, safe, ready to go. We've talked about selling what we've got, and we've talked about user orientation. Whereabouts are you, and where are you in your agency? So in 1976, I just got off the boat. I've been in this country a couple of years. And I was into all this marketing stuff that Levitt had come up with, this user orientation, all this sort of stuff. Nobody was interested, but NRPA heard about it, and they thought, well, this is something different. We don't know what marketing is, nothing to do with us, but it's different. They're always looking for something different and unique. So they say, come on our program. So I show up in Denver, and it's about marketing leisure services, marketing parks and recreation services. And they put me in a room like this, and I'm ready to go. And 3 people show up. So 3. Because marketing had absolutely nothing to do with this field. I mean, you're out to lunch, Crompton. We don't do marketing. What are you talking about? I mean, there was no connection at all. And then 2 years later, Proposition 13 passes, and I'm only a guy around who pretends to know anything about this stuff. So immediately, Crompton's on side again, and they're crawling off the windows, you know, on all sides. And so these slides I'm putting up now came from that 1978 presentation, wherever he was there. So I'd put up a slide, and I'd say, softball is an asinine activity. For a grown man or woman to stand in the middle of a field with a stick and waft it at a ball, they make it a big ball so you can't net it, is absolutely asinine. And golf is worse. You stand there with a stick in your hand and you swipe it at a ball and you jump into your truck and you drive after it and you chase it in and you get out and you drive it. I mean, the whole thing is nonsense. I mean, what would a Martian think if they saw somebody playing golf? I mean, it's insane. Golf is, what is it? Golf is a series of crises with a very occasional miracle. And the lowest score wins, huh? And the winner buys the drinks, huh? I mean, absurd, you know. I was back home a few years back. I was asking one of my friends, who was a Scottish lad in Crosby there. I says, tell me about. He was a golf player. I said, what? Tell me about why you have 18 holes in golf. That makes no sense to me. Why don't you have 20 or 15? And he said, well, you don't get it, Crompton, do you? There's 18 nips in a whiskey bottle. Well, of course, it made eminent sense then, didn't it? So it's not. So, of course, it's not about these trivial activities, is it? These trivial, banal activities. Why do you do these activities? They are vehicles that get you the benefits people seek. And what do they want? They want social interaction with friends, and they want to gain in prestige. You know, it's the bottom of the seventh, and you hit a home run or something, and you get recognition, excitement, and ego satisfaction of achievement, and security. You're part of a group. You belong. You're not lonely in your society. Fantasy or illusion. You're Jack Nicklaus out there, at least until you hit the ball. The relaxation, alleviation of stress and tension, which may be obtained from hard, or in the case of softball and golf, no physical effort. It's feeling of well-being, aesthetic enhancement, challenge and risk. These are why you do the activities. It has nothing to do with the trivial things. I mean, the reason you get clobbered at budget time is because people think you do trivial things. And of course, they are trivial activities. But the point is, they facilitate important human needs. And they don't know that. And you know the reason they don't know that is because you haven't told them. Your clients think they're playing softball or they're playing soccer or something. They're not. They're getting important human benefits. That's the point of the exercise. I have done numerous interviews, hundreds and hundreds of interviews with people. And after you get into this for about 10 minutes and you say, well, why are you doing this? Why'd you give it up? What's the purpose of it? And so on. Eventually, they'll say things like, you know, I never thought about it like that before. And now you've changed their perspective and level of importance. You know, I'm in a department, I'm in a college of agriculture. And I'm in something called Recreation, Park and Tourism Sciences. Like, there's 14 departments in the College of Agriculture, and 13 of the other 13 in there, they're all gene jockeys. You know, they hybrid this, and they split that, and they DNA that, and all of this high-powered scientific stuff. And I do parks, recreation, and tourism. So every time a new dean comes in, you know, Peter Witt and I used to wander up there every time a new dean comes in, and we say, you know, you're a gene jockey, and you don't get what we do, but let me tell you something. And we get past the rubric. In recreation, in our department, it means two things: youth development and community development. And in parks, it means environmental sustainability. And in tourism, it means economic development. And Mr. Dean, let me tell you, the people of Texas are very concerned about youth development, community development, environmental sustainability, and economic development. And they could give a hang if you clone another cow or you don't. I mean, they're not interested. And, you know, but what I do, they are very interested in. And more importantly, Mr. Vice-Chancellor, he happens to be a Vice-Chancellor as well as a Dean. More importantly, Mr. Vice-Chancellor, when you get in front of the Appropriations Committee in the legislature, my stuff will sell. Your stuff won't. And he gets it. And so, you know, we have this big recession in there, and the university's cutting back and all this stuff. And so Whit and I go forward to him, and we say, we need a new person in youth development, an additional position. And people around the college think, you're nuts, Crompton. They're letting people off and handing him in new positions. We got it. Why? Because he can go in front of the Appropriations Committee and say, we've hired people in youth development. That's very important. Much more important than these cloning DNA deals, you know. And so once you start talking in benefits, you've got a whole different response out there politically. Your elected officials remain ignorant of what you do because you haven't told them. You know, some of my friends waste their lives out on these big Texas reservoirs, and I ask they're fishing. I asked my friend Carson, I said, I don't get it. I mean, fishing, it reminds me of my daddy's definition of a fisherman. You got sort of a bamboo pole on one end and sort of an idiot on the other end of it. I mean, Carson, I don't get it. You sit out in this reservoir for 6 hours out there, hoping some sorry fish will impale itself on your hook. And you could go and be a consultant somewhere and make $100 or $200, a couple $100, and you could go and buy 300 or 400 fish. I mean, it seems to me grossly inefficient. You would waste your time out in a reservoir. Well, we know why people pits, to experience the out of doors, develop skills. I like this one best, to pit wits with the fish, which about sums up the whole sorry business. To be with friends around Golden Pond and all that, share with others, medical change, escape, take a trip. And for some people to get food. But that ain't why people fish. They fish for these other reasons. It's a vehicle, that's the point. And so, ladies and gentlemen, what do you see? What do you see on the screen? I hope your answer is not going to be some children playing soccer. Because that's what the layman sees. What you see is some children getting social recognition, excitement, the ego satisfaction of achievement, security of belonging to a group, social interaction. But you know, their parents don't know that. They think they've got some kids kicking a soccer ball around, and this trivial activity can come or go, it doesn't matter. Those are important features in children's development, but you haven't told them that. If you have, you've told them once and you haven't kept harping on it. You haven't kept telling them. What's your business you're in? You're not in these vehicles. And if elected officials don't get it, whose fault is it? You haven't told them. You haven't got a constituency up there. So, user benefits are important. They meet basic human needs. So now I've got to talk a bit about Colin Mason. Colin was a guy who introduced me to leisure in Liverpool. And growing up in Liverpool, I worked for a while in Scott's Bakery as a teenager, and I worked at the weekends, and I worked the night shift in school vacations. And Scott's delivered all the bread and confectionery for the Merseyside conurbation. And when you worked at Scott's, you started out at the oven's end, and you worked in a pair of shorts, as hot as Hades, with these 10-foot square ovens, and you shoved the stuff in, shoved the loaves in with the hod, and then when they come up the other end, you got the hod and you dragged them onto the belt, and they went bouncing down the belt. Well, with time at Scott's, I got promoted. And in Scott's, promotion wasn't about getting more money, you got to move further from the ovens. So I finished up as the back man on the slicing machine. So here's the deal. These loaves come bouncing down the belt from the ovens, and the slicing machines are at right angles. So there's two people on the slicing machine. I'm the front man, I'm the back man, and I've got to take the loaves off the main belt and put them on a 4x5 pallet on the other belt. And then Colin Macon, was the back man on the slicing machine. And when I had filled my pallet, Colin zoomed into action. He pressed the button, which brought the blades down on the loaves, and the blades went up again, and then he pressed the button again, and they went on down to the wrapping machines. And Colin did that 46 hours a week in Scots. He'd go, ch, ch, and that was it. That was his job. Colin introduced me to leisure. All the time he was doing it, Colin was jabbering on. He was a fan of Liverpool Football Club, and he stood on the Kop and he cheered for Liverpool on a Saturday afternoon, and he'd talk about last week's match from Saturday through Wednesday and next week's match from Wednesday through Saturday to the next week's match from Wednesday to the next Saturday. He was a soccer coach. He coached a youth team on Brook Vale, and they practiced on a Tuesday night, Thursday night. They played on a Sunday morning. He was a member of his club, his pub darts team and his pub cribbage team. He lived in a row house like most of us in Liverpool, and he had a little garden at the back where he grew his roses and he was just excited about his roses and jabbered on all the time about that. And it gradually dawned on me, that's who Colin Makin is. He defines himself by what he does in his leisure time. It's not pushing a button in Scots. He gets those basic human needs we talked about from his leisure activities. He gets recognition and prestige. He gets exhilaration and excitement. He gets the ego satisfaction of achievement. He gets part of a group, the feeling of being important. He gets all of that from his leisure activities. Colin Makin was a fan of Liverpool Football Club. He was a soccer coach. He was a cribbage player, a darts player, and a rose grower. Only happened to make some money by pushing a button at Scots. But he defined himself, those basic human values, in his leisure time. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the point. These are not leisure benefits. These are fundamental human benefits. Now, if I take that a little stage further and I look at the Bureau of Labor statistics for the fastest growing jobs in America over the next period of time. So what I've got up here, if I can aim this thing right, what I've got up here is employment in 2010 and the Bureau of Labor Statistics projections for 2020. There are 143 million jobs in America in 2010, 163 in 2020 is the projection. And this is the fastest growing job areas in America. What I want you to look at is the column on the right-hand side. This is the median income of these jobs. 33. 64 for nurses. 20, 20, 19, 26, 17, 30, 37, 23, 45, 24, 19, 34, 18, 51, 25, 22, 23. What you see is the fastest growing jobs in America are the bottom of the line jobs. The service economy and is alive and well, the minimum wage job. Now, if you are, pick one, a janitor and a cleaner, and you're making $22,000 a year, it is very, very difficult for you to get those basic human needs we have talked about from being a janitor and a cleaner. You're the Colin Makins of the world. And that's where an increasing proportion of Americans are going to be. They will get their basic human needs in the context of leisure and their family, or they will not get them. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why what you do is very important. And your elected officials and your citizens don't know that. And they don't know because you're still talking about trivial games and stuff. You're not talking about the values that those vehicles deliver to people. I'm going to skip these in the interest of time. I ain't going to mess with that. So we meet basic needs, and those are fundamental human needs are always going to be important to what we do, and users are always going to be important because they're the primary advocates. They're the infantry in lobbying and referendums. I told my folks in recreation, I said, look, when the budget hearing comes, I just want you to have in that room 1/10 of 1% of the citizens in this city. And I want those 1/10 of 1% shouting about how you're underfunded in recreation, and we'll get it changed. 1/10 of 1%, we've got 100,000 folks, there's 100 folks. You give me 100 folks in the council chamber who are hollering about how bad recreation is being treated, I guarantee you the budget will change. It's going to happen. I don't care how many fancy studies you've got and white papers you've got and all the rest of it. If there's 100 passionate folks out there, I'm telling you as an elected official, they're going to win. That's going to happen. So it's about those users are very important. They are infantry and they're your lobbyists to get you from A to B. And so a few years ago, back in the 1990 or so, there were some agencies now that are fairly good at user benefits, focusing on users and talking about user benefits. And they still were tugging at elected officials like Crompton saying, you know, we're doing a great job here with our users and explaining what they're doing and so on, and they weren't getting a positive response. So Crompton goes, well, why not? Well, he goes back to his basic training in economics. We're focusing here on user benefits. Now, if you go down to look at who benefits from user benefits, well, the individual who participates and nobody else. So you go to the next line, which says, well, then who pays? Well, the answer is obvious. The individual pays all the costs. If the individual's getting all the benefits, the individual then pays all the costs. That's the way it's got to be. But that isn't what's happening. What's happening is that if you go to the bottom left, this gizmo isn't working right, or I'm not aiming it right. If you go to the bottom left in there, the community, who pays the community through the tax system, and most of us are getting tax support for what we do. So if you go back up and say, well, who benefits on the left-hand side? The answer is a large proportion of people have to benefit if you're going to use tax support. And so that means there has to be widespread community benefits in order to justify tax support. But you're not talking about widespread community benefits. You're all hung up on user benefits. User benefits then are a necessary, they're the foundation, but they are not sufficient condition to win the game because you've got this line of, what I call line of incongruity. You've got tax resources being put to support user benefits. That doesn't make any sense. Taxpayers have no interest in supporting you. I mean, you know, my people come in and they say, we've got 1,000 kids in Little League. And I say, well, that's wonderful. We've got 100,000 cities, so you've got 1% of them in Little League. And you're expecting me to subsidize that? I mean, get real. The other 99%, why should they subsidize that 1%? Make your case, you know. And so user satisfaction is an inadequate measure of our success. Why? Because most taxpayers are not users of most of our services. So they're asking, why should they support them? You need a wider base of support to win. You can't win just with users. And so Crompton's gradually dawning on him in the 90s that it's the off-site benefits that count highest, not the on-site benefits. By the off-site benefits, I mean those that accrue to the community as a whole as a result of the programs and facilities you offer, not just the users. Ladies and gentlemen, you're not going to get Bert and Ethel into your recreation centre. I don't care how smart you are, they're not coming. But you need their vote. So the question is, what is in it for Bert and Ethel for the programs that you're doing? You've got to answer that question. They're the off-site beneficiaries, and you need their vote. You can't win with just users. You ain't got enough people out there. The field's sine qua non, its rationality, its purpose, is that it performs a necessary service for the community beyond responding to the demands of particular user groups. As an elected official, I want to know how all taxpayers are going to benefit, because I'm interested in the tax rate and keeping it down. You've got to demonstrate to me they can all benefit. And so we have seen more recently the emphasis moving up the pyramid to community benefits focus. Not just user benefits, but community benefit focus. Now we're moving upwards to the future as to where we need to be. Some years ago, back in 1990, a good friend of mine in England, Sue Gliptus, wrote a lovely little book on leisure and unemployment. She had been doing a series of experiments to see what impact leisure would have on unemployed youth, and she wrote it up in this nice little book. And Sue said this, and I had one of these eureka moments. Sue said, "The provision of leisure for its own sake still lacks political clout. It has to show other, more tangible returns, such as jobs, urban regeneration, alleviating delinquency or whatever, to be worth funding. On its own, it sounds too flippant. It carries real political conviction only if advocated for other instrumental reasons too." And I thought, hallelujah, absolutely right on the money. That's the point. You've got to have, it's got to be a vehicle that delivers benefits to all the residents in the community, not just a subset of them who are called users. And so, ladies and gentlemen, let's look again. What do you see? Well, we know it's not about kids kicking a soccer ball, don't we? We know it's about these user benefits. But why should Bert and Ethel be concerned about those kids getting user benefits? So look again. What do you see? What I hope you see is reduced healthcare costs, alleviating juvenile crime, building community cohesion, economic development through tournaments. I hope that's what you see. But again, your taxpayers don't know that. And they don't know it because you haven't told them. You might have told them once, you might have told them twice, but you haven't told them over and over again. It's not part of your everyday vocabulary. It's not part of your internal everyday vocabulary. If it isn't internal, it certainly won't be external. That's what you've got to be talking about to have viability in the future in your community. Those are the keys, not the activities. So we move on. Community benefits are stage 4, but there's 2 new ones. And here's where our future really lies. It's called positioning and then activating the position. The present position you hold in people's minds is that recreation and park provision is perceived to be a relatively discretionary, non-essential government service, nice to have if it can be afforded. That's where most agencies sit in most of their taxpayers' heads, and certainly in elected officials' heads. So the challenge is to shift that to a position park and recreation services so they are perceived to be, and here's the key phrase, a central contribution to alleviating the major problems in a community identified by taxpayers and decision makers. A central contribution to alleviating the problems in the community. I see some of you taking pictures. This is you can download it. I'll give you the thing at the end if you need it. So what is a position? How do you get to a position? Well, positioning came into the marketing literature back in 1970s, 1980s. A couple of guys called Rice and Trout, positioning were the positioning gurus. They put a series of articles in Advertising Age, then they put it in a book, and then they did an update of the book in 2000. Here's what they said. Working out an identity program, which is position in our terms, for a corporation, Parks and Recreation Department, usually entails a retracing of steps until you discover the basic business of a company, a recreation park agency. This requires poring over old plans and programs, seeing what worked and what didn't. So, why did urban parks come into being? Well, they regenerated working people so they'd be more productive workers. This was the pitch. They attracted tourists who spent money in the local economy. That was the pitch. To foster democratic equality, I love it. Different classes mingle together while strolling, picnicking and croquet playing, and thus social homogeneity is nurtured. And social coherence. They were incubators of safety and social order. They alleviated crime by strengthening local pride and affection of the inhabitants for each other. So I've taken these from the rationales for the early urban park system, and you can look at those and say, well, get real. But the point about that is, they don't say you have urban parks so that some user can go throw a frisbee, or, you can go for a walk in the park or something. What you see there is community-wide benefits. that all taxpayers benefit from it. Of course, those are the secondary rationales. What's the major rationale for urban parks? I got enough time, I'll drift off into it. Why did urban parks come into being? Well, about 15, 20 years ago, it struck me that urban parks emerged in the dirtiest, messiest cities. If national parks were America's greatest idea and gift to the world, urban parks were Britain's greatest idea and a gift to the world. And so where did urban parks emerge in England? Answer: London, Liverpool, my hometown, and Manchester. The central cities in the Industrial Revolution, the messiest, dirtiest cities you could imagine. Where did they emerge in America? Answer: New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Chicago. The dirtiest, messiest, filthiest cities in America back in those days. And so I'm thinking, wait a minute, you've got all of this chaos in cities. You've got no sanitation, no running water, you've got sewage everywhere, you've got all these horses and all the dung everywhere, you've got pigs running around, you've got, all the factories alongside the houses because there's no communication, so no travel, no commuting potential, so you've got to put the houses right around the factories and they belch out smoke and they dump all the stuff on you and they stink and there's pigs running around cleaning up the offal and there's rats everywhere. And you go and spend 300 million on a park? That's bizarre. That makes absolutely no sense to me. And that just I couldn't figure it out. That just didn't make any sense to me that they'd do that. So I got to go into the archives of these places. When I found myself over there, I'd go in the archives and try to figure out why parks come about, and I figured it out. Parks were driven by the medical community. So disease in those days was a function of what are known as miasmas, smells. All disease came from smells. Miasmas, a Latin word meaning noxious gases. And whether you got flu or whether you got typhoid, depending on how bad the smell was. Germ theory didn't come into being until 1870, and it never caught on really nationally until about 1900. So parks came about miasmas. Well, you'll recall in your chemistry, well, let me back up. Joseph Priestley had discovered oxygen back in about 1770, 1780 in England. Priestley, the founder of the Unitarian Church and a theologian, an educator, and dabbled in chemistry, dabbled in science. Good friend of Ben Franklin's, who also, of course, dabbled in science a lot. Then Franklin was an Anglophile, he was over there at that time. So Priestley discovered oxygen. He did this experiment you did in your high school lab. He put a candle in a bottle and put the top on, and the candle went out. No oxygen. Then he put the candle in the bottle with some vegetation, and the candle kept lit. And he discovered oxygen, because the vegetation created oxygen. Brilliant idea, brilliant innovation. And so Priestley was a controversial character, a big supporter of the French Revolution and the American Revolution, which didn't make him popular in England. So he got chased out of England, and Ben Franklin invited him over to Philadelphia. So he strutted his stuff over here in Philadelphia for a bit and brought that awareness with him. So by the turn of the 1800s, you've got to grown people realizing vegetation creates oxygen. Oh, oxygen. And we've got all these noxious gases in there. So the miasmas was so the doctors get into it. Thomas Salford Smith, who's the medical officer of England, and Arnott in Liverpool, and Duncan in Manchester, and the doctors are advocating for urban oases, parks, clean air to clean up the miasmas. Comes over to America, and who was the great stimulus for parks in New York? Answer: John Griscom. John Griscom. Who was John Griscom? I have my friend, the Associate Commissioner for Parks for New York, in the front row here. Who was John Griscom? John Griscom was the Chief Medical Officer for New York City in 1844. Produced a report saying, you've got to have parks in here to get rid of all these nasty smells. The elected officials, with typical head in the sand reactions, refused to publish it, buried it, and fired him. But nevertheless, it was out there. And then who led the charge in Boston for parks? Anchor Oliver Wendell Holmes. not his son, the judge, but over the Holmes studio. You read Holmes's speeches in Boston for Parks, passionate, trained in France, the leading physician in Boston, who led the charge in Chicago. John Roach published a magnificent book on the virtues of parks in 1869, advocating them because they created oases of clean air and would stop disease and so on. Who did it in New Orleans? Ed Barton, chief medical, and so it goes on. The medical fraternity drove urban parks in the UK and this country because they had a public benefit. Everybody benefited from them. That's the story of urban parks. And of course, what you then see is who can afford to locate around these oases that will keep you living longer and safe? Of course, the rich. So these became prime spots, so property values go, and so on. And so parks then had an instrumental value out there. Parks were, everybody benefited from having them. What about public recreation the other side of the house? Well, you go back and you look at the Wall Street Journal and the Christian Science Monitor and the New York Times back in the 1890s, 1900, 1910. There was one reason for public recreation only, and it was to alleviate juvenile crime among young males, to encourage civility and civic responsibility. It had nothing to do with users, it had to do with society, that's the point, benefiting. That's why it became a tax-supported service, not for a few users. Society benefited. I love this quote from the Chicago Tribune. It's said by the president of the Juvenile Protection Association. Recreation is the antitoxin of delinquency. And the sooner it is administered, the milder will be the disease, and the better it will be for all children. Love it. I like this quote. I like this picture. All these children were arrested in a single day for playing in the streets. Will you help provide playgrounds? Everybody benefits from having this stuff. The President of the United States of America, in a letter where President Taft wrote to the Playground Association, that's the initial recreation people, I do not know anything which will contribute more to the strength and morality of that generation of boys and girls compelled to remain part of urban populations in this country than the institution in their cities of playgrounds. Yeah. I mean, we solve the world's problems. We get tax support because we address problems central to society. And that's what we've forgotten. And that's where your future lies. You have to address problems central to society. We'll skip that. No, I'm not. I'm going to talk about it. David Gray and Cy Grieben wrote the most important document ever written in this field. It was called, it was published in 1974 in Parks and Recreation. And it was sort of Dan, what was the name of that thing? Future Perspectives, yeah, it was the future of this field. It was a paper which was talked about for 10 years and still resonates today. And David, of course, was a mentor of many of us of my vintage, chief academic in the field at those days out in California. Cy Grieben was the head of Los Angeles City and Los Angeles County systems, and they produced this report. Here's one of the things David and Cy said. We are not identified with the major problems which confront our total American society. Put your city's name in there, which is a deep concern and disappointment. The field should focus park and recreation services on the great social problems of our time in your community and develop programs designed to contribute to the amelioration of those problems. David and Cy got it. That's 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and we still don't have that in much of our thinking. So what benefits can society benefit from in your community? Well, there's 19 of them. And you have to pick the ones that work for you, typically 2 or 3 of them. But do you have anything to do with attracting tourists, attracting businesses, attracting retirees, enhancing real estate values, reducing sanitation? Of course you do. Of course you do. So some of those, 1 or 2 of those might work in your community in terms of economic prosperity. What about environmental sustainability? Your parks have something to do with cleaning water, controlling flooding, cleaning air, reducing traffic congestion with trails, reducing energy costs with tree planting, heat island effect and all that, preserving biological diversity. Oh, it's a nice trite term, isn't it? Yes, until you realize that a quarter of all current medicines came from flora, another quarter from fauna, and as they disappear, we lose those opportunities for the future, we narrow our base, and it has direct health problems, apart from anything else, upon our society. Social problems, we can reduce environmental stress, community regeneration. No regeneration happens that's worth anything unless the letters are the center of it. The cultural and historical preservation, facilitating healthy lifestyles, you know, the obesity stuff and fitness stuff, and those two by the same are not the same thing. We have people who are not obese who are hopelessly unfit. Alleviating deviant behavior among youth, raising educational talent, alleviating employment. So we've got 19 of these community-wide benefits. And you have to pick which one or two work in your community and position accordingly. What is the political narrative in your community and where is it? You have to select the position by selecting the community benefits that work in your community. The big idea associated with repositioning is that funds are, and this is a key phrase from an elected official's point of view, invested in solutions to a community's most pressing problems. The term investing suggests a positive forward-looking agenda with a return on the investments. Elected officials usually have no mandate to fund programs. Their mandate is to invest resources into solutions. Some implications of positioning. Number one, it's a relative rather than absolute context. You have all done studies, surveyed your citizens, and they've come back and said, in recreation parks, we're highly satisfied, very satisfied, extremely satisfied, and 95% say that, and you get your budget cut. How can that be? How can they be so satisfied and my budget get cut? Well, there's a hierarchy in people's minds in the local area of what's important. And the most important thing in local communities is education. I won't bother to tell you how to derive this, but it's empirically done. And then health and hospitals, and then police, and then welfare, and then public works, and then transportation, and then fire, and then housing and development, and then economic development, and then tourism, and then parks and recreation, and thank the good Lord for arts and libraries. So you might be doing a terrific job and be highly satisfied with what you're doing. But the point about that is, you're down here, you're not important. And you can be as terrific as you like down here, but you're not important. You only get to be important in the budget process when you start climbing up that ladder in people's heads. How do you rate compared to these other folks? Well, you don't rate unless you start solving problems. That's the key to this deal. So legislators' political platforms represent residents' concerns. I ran for elected office, and I won 3 elections. I ran for elected office on a platform. And so I said to my recreation and parks folks, I says, look, if you're going to do something that's going to help me commit to fulfill my contract with the voters and get this done, I will put resources your way. But if you're not, if you're going to keep doing what you've already done, forget it. I'm taking resources from you to somebody who will help me meet that contract with the voters. I have no obligation to fund you. I have an obligation to invest in solutions to the community's problems. And if you're not tied in with those problems, then I'm not going to fund you. It's pretty simple. That's the way elected officials operate. So it's about being important and central to community problems and getting that in people's heads that you're accomplishing that. So I tell them the challenge isn't financial, it's political. You know, don't come to me and say, well, create more resources. Forget it. You know, I'm not raising taxes. I'm out of there. I'm no good to you. If I suggest raising taxes, I'm done. You know, the fire's fixed. The pie is fixed. And so in order to get you more resources, recreation parks, you have to demonstrate to me that you can address these problems better than these other folks. And if you can't, and some of these other folks can do it better than you, I'm going to take your resources and put them there. I mean, that's what I should be doing as an elected official. And so the key is you've got to ally with what the issues are. And it means that some services are discretionary. That means that you can't make the case for them because they don't fit in what the problems of the community are. And that's just the way it is. They may have strategic importance, but generally they're discretionary. So I think as I look in the future now, bearing that background in mind, I think the recreation side of the House is going to have a really tough time. It is very clear to me that public recreation has declined in popularity amongst the general public. And I can tell you how that is, because when I did these community surveys back in the 1970s, you would ask a question of a household, has anyone in your household participated in a public recreation program in the past month? And you would typically get 12 to 15% of households saying yes. Today that number's 3 and 4%. You have lost a lot of folks. And the reason you've lost them is because of competition. The non-profits are out there, big time. I mean, I'm on a board with Tim Richardson. Tim's a vice president of the Boys and Girls Club out in Atlanta. Tim told me that in the last 5 years, they've opened a new Boys and Girls Club somewhere in the world every second business day. I mean, boom, they're there. You see the Ys, I mean, huge. So the non-profits are highly active, whereas they were not back in those days. The mega churches in my neck of the woods. I mean, this is my church's family life center. Looks awful to me like a recreation center. You know, I mean, you've got gyms in here, you've got meeting rooms and around here and so on. I mean, we got 5 of those in my town. Why on earth would we build a recreation center? The churches are doing the job. The emergence of the commercial sector. There are 30,000 fitness clubs in this country now. There were none in 1974. We did it. They came in, and Jane Fonda and tapes and stuff, and you know, commercialized the whole thing. We don't do that anymore now. We're an afterthought in that, whereas we used to dominate that market. And all this stuff in your ears, all this gizmo stuff, I don't get at all. Any of this home electronic equipment stuff. I mean, that wasn't around back in the 1970s. And social networking isn't around. I mean, my wife is a birder. So in the old days, what would happen is the recreation department would organize a birding trip, you know, birding hours and teachers and classes and so on. Now what happens? Well, they've got some gizmo or other, some they twit and tweet each other or whatever and communicate, and recreation department isn't part of the deal, you know. They're not in the loop. They do it themselves without them. They can do it now with the technology. We're redundant. And so I see recreation is going to have an increasingly tough time as the years go on. It's going to be increasingly tough to make the case. Internally, there's also more competition for general fund revenues. Cities now are doing a ton more things than they were back in 1974. And many of these things, as cities, we've got to do as elected officials, are unfunded mandates. The state passes them down and passes a law and says, you've got to do this. You don't give us any money for it. And so you've got to pull it out of this same fixed pie. So you're in more competition internally. Externally, you've got more competition for discretionary time and money. The shopping malls, professional sports, which have gone absolutely nuts. You know, A&M played somebody called Ball State, whoever that is, in Indiana last week. Would you believe 103,000 people show up to watch this nonsense? I mean, it's like playing, I mean, it's ridiculous, absurd. And it's all over the televisions and whatever. I mean, it's totally out of control, but people are watching it, and it's taken away from your market area. College sports gone nuts. Movies now, because they're streamed or something or other, and then, I don't know how it all works, but it comes into your gizmos, and you don't, it's easier as you go on through. The point is, in recreation, you've got all kinds of competition you've never had. And you will be increasingly challenged to survive. That's my prognosis for the recreation side of the House. So on parks, it's much easier. Parks, we've never had so much support for parks in America as we have now. Incredible investments in parks that are coming forward from people recognizing the legitimacy of climate change, from their concern about clean air and clean water. Tremendous support for parks. We haven't fully exploited that politically, but it's there, it's there. And I think I see parks coming on like a storm. I think they're going to do great as we go on through here in this terms of positioning as a central need in society. Recreation, sure, if you've got at-risk youth in an area, you make the case and there's benefits to be had there, but it will be increasingly, in my view, there'll be discretionary activities. And so, where are you, ladies and gentlemen? Whereabouts are you in your thinking? And whereabouts is your agency? Are you down here, safe, clean, ready to go? Are you selling that stuff? Or have you recognized we start with user benefits and what they want and their ideas, and we move forward? Have you recognized that's a necessary but not sufficient condition for your future success? Are you talking about community-wide benefits? Do your citizens get the community-wide benefits that your services offer, or are you just limited to each other? Have you selected a position? And typically I recommend you select one or two of those community-wide benefits I put up on the recreation side of the house, and one or two on the park side, no more. You can't do everything to all people. You become a snake oil salesman, you lose your mission, lose your sense of focus. Have you got a position, and have you activated the vision? Which means, are you actually doing things which demonstrate you're working the position? Well, I think that's the future. Marketing myopia, narrow, short-term thinking. If you refuse to reposition, your agency will wither and perhaps die. Thank you.
On behalf of NRPA, thank you very much, Dr. Crompton, for your hard work and participation in the 2015 annual conference. Thank you for your attendance and participation. Please turn in your CEU tickets, complete your evaluation forms, and please return your CEU ticket to the room host at the back of the room.